Hi, and welcome to Lights Cable Action. I'm Maria Lemieux, and I'm here with Jackie Pratt from Selco. We're here today with Mike Plasski from Helps, and we're doing a home energy efficiency audit. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about the home efficiency audit?
Absolutely. Home Energy Help stands for Home Energy Loss Prevention Service. I do energy audits in Shrewsbury for the Shrewsbury Light Department. An energy audit essentially consists of a top-to-bottom inspection of your home. I generally start in the basement though, starting at the heating system, looking at age of equipment, distribution system, insulation levels in the basement, air leakage opportunities, and then from there progressing throughout the house, looking at windows and doors, insulation levels, and then into the attic space, looking at insulation levels there and opportunities for air sealing. And that's essentially the walkthrough, and then at the end of the walkthrough, I punch a bunch of information through my iPad, and I'm able to produce a report, and then I sit down with the homeowner and review the information as well as the services that are provided by the Shrewsbury Electric Light Department.
Okay, now Helps is something that's available to municipal energy.
So if you're a customer of an investor-owned utility like National Grid or Eversource, you would go to Mass Save's website. For us, for the municipal utilities, and there are 40 municipal utilities in Massachusetts, for a number of those municipal utilities, Helps provides the home energy services for energy audits, for rebates, things of that nature. And you would be able to get more information by going to munihelps.org. Or if you're interested in getting an energy audit, you can actually call our Helps hotline, which is 1-888-333-7525. Correct, Mike?
So what I'd like to do is to get started on the energy audit, and like I said, I'd like to get started in the basement, so if we could proceed down there, we can begin the audit.
Let's go.
All right.
Okay, so now we're coming downstairs.
And like I said, I always like to start wherever the boiler is located. So
Okay, we're gonna go this way. And right in here.
Great. So you've got a burning boiler, you've got an atmospheric boiler, and you've got a bonnet damper on it with an electrical damper. So the way that your system works here is when it's not firing, there's a flap within this system here that closes that allows it to maintain heat because there's a pilot burning within the system. I'm assuming this is the original boiler. It hasn't been updated since you've...
that is correct. Certainly appears that way.
So this boiler was put in probably 1993 or 4 when the house was built.
93, yep.
So it's 23 years old. I'm going to suggest on my report that you upgrade the boiler. However, where you're not really having any issues with it, I don't think it's something you need to run out and do. This has an AFUE. Generally, there's a tag on it. This only has the energy guide label on it.
Okay.
And that label on a newer system would have numbers on it. And this thing would have an annual fuel utilization efficiency of when it was installed, probably somewhere around 80%. The newer systems today, which are the high efficiency gas systems, are somewhere in, the highest ones are somewhere in the 95 plus range, and that would have a rating tag on it and showing an AFUE of that. What I do suggest though is if you haven't had this serviced in several years, it's not a bad idea, particularly with a gas system, to have it serviced every 3 or 4 years. At least have them come and look at it, just make sure everything's clean inside. The burner is operating as it should be with the right oxygen mixture. If this were an oil-fired system, and just touch on that, we would be suggesting that it gets serviced each year on an oil-fired system. It's much like a car, you want to tune that up each year. There's cleaning that goes on because oil burns a little bit differently than natural gas.
How often should a gas system be?
Generally, the rule of thumb is somewhere within every 2-3 years or so. Like I just had mine. I've got a high-efficiency gas system in my own home, and I had it serviced just this year. It was probably 4 or 5 years since I've had anything done with it. And I was asking my technician, sort of quizzing him on stuff, and he said, there's not a lot of moving parts in there, so there's not a lot that you need to do with them. But on this, where it's atmospheric, there are some adjustments they can make on the oxygen that's feeding the flame to make sure that it's operating efficiently. I can see that on your hot water tank, your natural gas hot water tank, you have a wrap on it. Most new tanks today, they're generally fairly efficient in the sense that they're already wrapped with insulation, so we're not ordinarily wrapping tanks any longer. But often when I see a tank wrapped, I can stick my hand in it, I still feel it retaining a little bit of heat. On a hot water tank, one of the other suggestions is to minimally wrap the first 6 feet of pipe what you get on a hot water tank, even when you're not calling for hot water, is you get standby losses. So even when this tank is not firing, there's heat that comes up this pipe here. So the first 6 feet is the most important. However, for you have to be cautious because you've got your damper right here. So you're probably going to have to start, you need 3-inch clearance, so you're probably going to have to start somewhere in this range here. I'd probably put a little zip tie on that, and then you can only maybe get 3 or 4 feet of pipe here, given the way that it buries into the ceiling.
Okay.
I can also see in your basement, standing in this area here, that the basement ceiling is insulated. It has probably, it looks like 6 inches of insulation. One of the things that you can notice here, and this is sort of a telltale sign both in attics and in basements, this probably has a little bit more to do with the heating system being here, but if I were in your attic and I was seeing this graying of this insulation, that's essentially dust around the insulation. That means that there's air movement. Now that's not unusual here because there's heat and there's going to be air movement around here. You can actually see the insulation moving a little bit in that direction here. If we were in an unfinished basement, this big basement here is a finished basement, but if we were in an unfinished basement, some of the key spots I'm looking at, particularly in an older home, this home was built in 1993, but if we're in a home, pre-1950, often this area up in here, which I will call, where this insulation is right there, the sill plate or the rim joist area, that's an area in most basements where there is not any insulation present, and it's a major recommendation in most of the homes that I go into. Because when you look at a home, most people don't realize when you're looking at a home, when it's being built and you're looking at that exterior wall, you'd say that, geez, that is exterior wall. However, once the floor goes on, we kind of lose track that that's still exterior wall. So just insulating those slots all the way around the basement is critical. 3 methods for doing it. One is straight fiberglass. The other, you could use a styrofoam board or a rigid insulation. And the third method would be spray foam. The other key component when you're looking at that rim joist area is any penetrations going out. So there'd be hot water pipe, your water spigots that feed your hoses and things outside. The other thing you'd be looking at is any sort of wiring that may run out. And then also in older homes, another key spot, you can see here in this home, we've got a gasket that runs along the foundation. So that stops a lot of air from transitioning in through the sill plate and where the foundation meet. In older homes, there often can be a space there that allows air to flow in through your home. One key component of what goes on in the home in the winter months is that heat's rising, as most of us know. And if heat's rising, if we're losing heat up through our attic space, our home is looking to pull air in, and generally where is it pulling it in? Through these lower levels of your home. So that's why it's a key component to stop that air from coming in. Also in a older home, again, this basement is finished, so there's not a lot of openings into the ceiling space, but we'd be looking at areas where plumbing would go through the floor. A lot of homes, particularly let's say ranch style homes that has a first floor basement, particularly may even have a full basement, we'd be looking at blocking up those large openings into the basement space. But in here, just to sort of sum up, the system is the same age as the house, so it may not be a bad idea to have this on your radar screen to upgrade at some point down the road. And then the hot water tank, it is wrapped, and I would suggest adding some insulation onto at least the first several feet of pipe that come off the tank.
Generally, how often do people actually have to replace the burner?
Most people don't generally change them out proactively. There's usually an issue that goes on. But most systems, from my experience, and I've been involved in this arena since 1981, they'll generally last 20 to 30 years. And some of the older ones, there's still some old ones out there that date back to when houses were built. So I can see some that were in there from the 1940s or so.
Okay.
But you can generally get a good 20 to 30 years out of a system. And with natural gas right now being as inexpensive as it is, and I was just reading in the paper this morning that there's a glut of natural gas in the United States, that the price per therm for natural gas is relatively low right now, and that all goes into the payback of what you'd get as a return on investment by upgrading the system. So if you went from changing this system out to a newer system today, you may save several $100s, but you're looking at somewhere in the $8,000 to $10,000 range if you were to put a high efficiency system in.
Okay.
Any questions for me in this area before we move on?
I don't think so, unless, is there a question about the insulation? Is like one insulation better than the other, like around this area?
Well, in this area here, you've got fiberglass, and that's fine. One of the things that I often look for, and this is a kind of a tight area to really do anything in, but when I'm looking at basement ceiling insulation, we call it floor insulation in this trade, I'd be looking just to make sure that it's kind of even and not sort of wavy and stuff like that, so you get a nice evenness to the insulation, so you're getting the full impact of the R value of that insulation.
Is a blown-in kind better to use, or
In
is
this area
okay?
here, it'd be very difficult to
Okay.
do something like that. I have seen in some homes, it's much more expensive, and this is primarily newer construction. I've seen spray foam put into some of those spots, but in your particular case here, I don't think it would be beneficial to change that out or cost effective.
Okay. Great. So moving
We'll
to the
move
rest of the basement?
Yes. Typically, in a finished basement, you know, I'm kind of looking just around the perimeter. In this home here, where we do have a drop ceiling, you know, I'm going to suggest to Maria that, you know, it may not be a bad idea. Just where on the edges of the ceiling, you pop the panels up and just make sure all that insulation is tucked up against that sill plate area that I was talking about over in the boiler room. But beyond that, just going to take a quick scan. I do have my infrared camera in my hand, and just to see if we can pick anything up in wall cavities. So I'm not sure if you can get a shot of that on the camera, but when you're doing an infrared scan, one of the things I'm looking at is the stud lines there. So we can see the stud lines in that camera. So the black stud lines are called the thermal bridge. So they're actually conducting the hot or cold much more quickly than an uninsulated cavity. So when I see the white in there in this particular screen, that's telling me that these foundation walls are insulated. So there's really not much more you could do in this space down here with relative to that. So I would just sort of walk around the basement, given that the finished nature of the basement, and just take a look to see if I can pick up any cold spots or anything like that. As I'm looking in the exercise room here, I can see that the windows are double pane, and they got a nice tight seal to them, and I'm not really picking up anything significant with my camera. Now, a couple of things I'll point out over here that I think may be relevant to other folks, particularly new homeowners. I find this to be an issue. So when I'm looking at this radiator right here, that's on the floor along this edge here, I can see that the flaps are down on this unit right here. You see how this flap is down right here on this unit? These are called slant fin radiators, and when it's closed, you don't get as much heat out of them. And some people close them purposefully because they don't want the heat on them. But often with new homeowners, there was a home actually, my son was doing some energy audits for me now. It was actually in Shrewsbury probably 2 or 3 months back, and he was in a home, and the homeowner was saying, my house is cold. And he walked in, and he looked around the house, and 90% of the flaps were down. And he opened it up, and the homeowners couldn't have been more thankful just for that one little tip. Because if these things are down, particularly in the winter months, and you've got your thermostat, let's say you're calling for 68 within your home, this is going to prevent the heat from coming out. So your boiler or furnace is going to run longer, and it's going to require you to use more fuel. So with this being an exercise room, these are probably closed because they don't want the excess heat in this room as they're exercising. The other thing I want to point out as well is a dehumidifier in here. Dehumidifiers, I kind of call them a necessary evil for us here in New England because basements do get damp and we need to run them. I usually suggest to people that it's a good idea to cycle them on and off. It's also a good idea to have the relative humidity setting on them, set maybe to a little bit higher, and see how that goes before keeping it very low, because the longer these things run, the higher your electric bill would be. So it's something I'm always looking at when I'm walking through homes. And the other thing I'll just touch on while we're here, there's a TV in this room here, and just a couple of things relative to TVs, and I can only go by what I've done in my own home, and I try to share that with homeowners. In my home, this is just a regular setup TV here, but if we went into a family room in a home, and similar to my home, I have the flat screen TV, I've got the cable box, I've got the Xbox, I've got the surround sound all tied into that. With everything in its off position, I plugged a watt meter into that. That unit was still pulling somewhere between 40 and 45 watts with everything off. When I ran it over a 24-hour period, I used almost 3 kilowatts. Now this was a weekend, so it was on quite a bit. One of the things I do suggest, and this varies from home to home, but if there's homes where there may be college-age kids that are away at college, I may suggest on putting those particular TVs on power strips so they can kill the power to the TV and not be using excess energy if they don't need to. But TVs, depending on how many components you've got connected to them, they can draw a lot of electricity that you really don't need to be using, particularly when you're not running the TV. So one of the things I want to point out here, we're standing in still in the basement at a door that leads out to the garage space. So anytime there's any opening between the inside and the out, we want to check it to make sure that it's appropriately weather stripped. As we can see, this has a gasket that goes around the edge of this door, along the top side of it, as well as down this side of it. And weather stripping is very important when it comes to doors. And I believe the calculation is if there's a 1/8 of an inch gap around the doorway, so if we go around the whole doorway and there's 1/8 of an inch gap, it's almost the equivalent when you do the math on it of having approximately a 2-inch hole in your door. So that's why weather stripping can be important. Now, one of the things I also look for and discuss with the homeowner is, how this weather stripping is working. Do they feel anything? Because there's also, we have enough space here, we could actually put another piece of weather stripping on here that would also add another layer of weather stripping that helps if the door isn't closing as well as it should. But this thing looks to appear to be appropriately weather stripped. We've got an insulated door on here, which is also good. It's something that's generally suggested in all new homes. And one of the other things I kind of always look for is myself is just to see if there's any light or air that we can see moving around the door itself. But this door looks to be fine. So one of the things we also focus on, or I focus on when walking through a home, is looking at lighting. As we can see in the basement, there's a number of recessed fixtures. And we've got probably 65-watt bulbs up in there. Today, with the LED bulbs, and the prices on LEDs are dropping significantly, replacing these 65-watt bulbs with a 9-watt or a 10-watt or a 15-watt bulb, there'd be a decent savings on doing that in this basement. And the LEDs, they're lasting 20, 25 years, so there's really a good payback on them. I'm going to be leaving a book with Maria. It's called The Consumer Guide for Energy Efficiency. And in Chapter 11, it really has a nice discussion on lighting. Talks about all the various types of lights, what the different numbers mean on lights, and I think you'll find there's a nice resource when you're looking to replace lights. Also in these fixtures here, we can see incandescent bulbs in there. And right now, the incandescent style bulbs that they're selling in the LED bulbs that they're selling to replace incandescents, they've really come down in price. You can find some of them in Home Depot, and I'm going to be installing a couple, or leaving a couple, whatever you prefer, today. You can find them somewhere between the $2 to $5 range, depending on the type of bulb you're looking for. And again, they give off a good quality light and save significantly on the amount of watts that you're using. You can probably replace this with a 9 or a 10-watt LED bulb.
Okay.
So here we are, we're up in the attic, looking at the insulation that's distributed around the attic. It originally looks like when this house was constructed, seeing the base layer of insulation, looks like there was probably 6 inches put down. We can see R19 on this piece of paper here. And it looks like there's been some additional insulation, another maybe 6 inches or so added on top of this. Now, a couple of things I want to focus on up here. One, as we look around at the insulation, a lot of it has been moved over time, and it could probably use some redistributing just to get everything kind of evened out and leveled off. Here's a spot right here we're looking at. We can see that the insulation has been moved, and I can actually see right down to the ceiling space. So that's something definitely we want to get corrected. Another thing I just want to point out here, which this home may be a good candidate for, in Shrewsbury Municipal Light Department has an incentive for insulation and air sealing, and there are definitely some air sealing opportunities up here, and where an insulation contractor could come in, straighten the insulation out, at the same time do the air sealing. If we look down here, we've got a hole in the floor where air can transition through. We've got wiring coming up. So again, like I had mentioned downstairs when we were discussing the door that leads to the garage, this is also another area where warm air is leaving our home and coming up into the attic space. So we want to prevent that warm air from coming up into this space. The other thing, we're standing right now filming this, it's a pull-down stairwell. Many people have pull-down stairwells in their home. There was no cover over this stairwell, so adding a cover over the stairwell is really a critical part, because this also becomes an access way for warm air to transition through. Just as a for instance, now this is a bigger space, this space up here, but an example that I know very well at the top of my head, if we had a 200 square foot room and we had a 5-foot opening, so we have 195 square feet of insulated area, 5 square feet with no insulation on it. By not having that 5 square feet in that smaller area, 200 square feet again, it reduces the overall effectiveness of the insulation by almost 50%. As we're looking around this attic space up here, we can see a lot of insulation moved and lifted. And although if we kind of glanced at this and we came up and looked at it, we'd say, oh, there's probably a good solid, 9 to 10, 11, 12 inches up here. But as I look at it, I will look at the overall effectiveness of this insulation, given the way that it's been moved around over the years, as being far less than what the R value would add up to. So that's why it would be important to get this relayed and fit back in. Also, I'm kind of looking at the area where one of the bathroom fans comes up through into the attic space, and looking around that vent fan coming up would also be another critical area for air sealing. And then we've got also up in this space, we have an air handler for the air conditioning unit. So we've got grates that go into the second floor ceiling that we would want to look at and make sure that those are all sealed up. And then from the standpoint, one of the things I always look at when I come up into an attic space is sort of the interior sheathing of the attic, and I don't see any issues with condensation that's really gone on up here over the years. Maybe a little bit on the nail heads, but nothing of any great significance. It looks to be fairly well ventilated as well. The biggest thing up here I can see is air sealing opportunities, getting the insulation straightened out so you don't have it, in some spots where it's lifted or missing, and then adding a cover over the top of the pull-down stairwell. So we're looking at the pull-down stairwell now. It leads into the attic. There is no cover over it, and you can see how this is blacker than what we had seen downstairs in the basement. So that's a clear indication that it's colder up there. Now the other thing that goes on with this too, we're talking mainly about heat, but also in the summer there's an impact in this room as well, because you get the heat that in the summer the inverse is going on, where the heat wants to bake into our house and drive its way down into the basement. So that's why having a cover on here can also benefit, particularly this room here, where you won't feel that excess heat coming in. But we can see we're picking up the cold on the edges of this pull-down stairwell. These windows have been recently replaced, so I'm not going to be suggesting any new windows in this home. These are double pane windows. Again, in the book that I'm going to be leaving with you in chapter 2, it has a nice discussion on windows. Every window that a homeowner would buy would come through with a fenestration label on it. The U value is one of the more important numbers. Today, to qualify as Energy Star, a window has to have a U value of 0.30. I always think in terms of R value better. The inverse of U equals R value, so 1 divided by the U value gives you the R value. So if this has a U value of 0.30, this window would have an R value of 3.33.
Can you explain what an R value is?
R value is just the resistance to how quickly heat or cold passes through a material. So for instance here, we've got, let's say an R value of 3 or so. If we're looking at the wall cavity, 2x4 construction, 3.5 inches of insulation in the wall, depending on the insulation, could have an R value of somewhere between 11 and 15 when they put it in. So let's call it 13. And then you've got sheathing, and we've got the exterior sheathing. So this wall, if we added all the composite material, it may have an R value of somewhere around 15. This glass has an R value of somewhere around 3 and change. One of the things that homeowners will often say to me is, my windows are drafty. Now I like the idea of having this type of shade on because it can pull down, and it really helps with that. I'm going to leave a sheet that describes this, but one of the things that goes on around glass occurs with convection. Heat transfers in 3 ways: conduction, convection, and radiation. So in this particular glass here, you get cold that radiates and conducts through this glass. So it makes the air right by this side of the glass colder. Colder air is denser or heavier than warmer air, so it drops and it creates a little natural convection right by the glass. So if we were sitting on this couch on a cold winter day and this shade was pulled up, you'd probably feel cold on the back of your head. And you may say, geez, there's a draft around these new windows. Well, there could be. However, more likely than not, there's probably just cold that's come onto this side as a result of it being so cold outside, and it's just made this area colder. Now, one of the other things that goes on with windows is, particularly double hungs, there's a lot of seams on double hung windows. So if you do get a windward pressure on the home, you may get, if we have a 20, 30 mile an hour wind blowing on this home, you could potentially get some, particularly in older homes with older windows, you may get some leakage around these edges. But these newer windows here, I'm not sure how well we can see on the camera, but there is weather stripping here. There is weather stripping on the base of this window, and then likewise there's weather stripping on the top of this window. And this also has a nice, I like this little area here. It's got a gasket in here as well. So when this window closes, and this lock becomes important, in that when you pull it, it gives a nice tight seal to it. Now one of the things that, after doing this for so many years and looking at so many windows, I kind of go by the class, I call it the class test, particularly on a double hung window. I think when you're shopping and looking for windows, if you're looking at this particular locking mechanism here, if that feels good and sturdy, like when you close a car door and you hear that nice solid sound to it, I also think this lock tells a lot about the quality of the window as well and how well it's going to fashion. Because this clamp here should actually push the window up and down and also pull it together so it gives it a nice tight seal. So when we were looking up in the attic, I had mentioned where we could see some of the insulation lifted. And that's what we're seeing right there, that spot, and there's a couple of other spots kind of right around that register as well. So the insulation has been lifted around that area. It's not a terribly cold day today. That spot right there is registering about 67. If we go over into an area where the ceiling is insulated, we're seeing that temperature is 76. So even on a day like today, there is some heat that's escaping up through that space there. So a couple of things I want to talk about in this space here. We're standing by the front door. We've got a front door with glass on it, and we've got two side panels that also have glass on it. So this is going to tend to make this area a little bit colder because we have this glass here. The other thing that goes on, we've got a very high ceiling here. We've probably got 16 to 20 feet height in this particular area. So this can become a concern for folks who think they've got drafts going on in their home. And again, there could be some areas where there may be some leakage around the door frame and stuff like that. But ordinarily what goes on here, if there's a temperature differential between up and down, again, you've got those convective currents moving within your home. If there's 1 degree temperature differential between spaces, that's going to create air movement. So generally in homes of this size and this type of design where you have a front door and a stairwell that goes right upstairs with the high ceiling, I generally get concerns from homeowners that they're feeling drafts. Now I would look around this area here, and in the basement, I would pay particular attention where we're talking about down in the boiler room, where that sill plate or rim joist could be located, and then I'd be looking at weather stripping around the door frame as well as caulking around this frame as well. But in looking at this particular door here, we can see that it's pretty well weather stripped. It's got the weather stripping going around the edges. We've got an insulated door here as well. One of the things I had mentioned downstairs that I'll just illustrate in this door here. Sometimes I'll go into a home and the door may not have a great fit. So there's another piece of weather stripping you can add onto a door, and this would go on this edge here, so that adds another compression fitting for the door when it closes, so it can stop some air from coming in. And often in older homes, sometimes you get the doors that are not plumb any longer, and this can go a long way to help in stopping that air from coming in. Because changing a door out per se is not a great energy saving measures. They take a fairly long time to pay for themselves unless there's some really large cracks or gaps around the door that can't be taken care of as a result of weather stripping. So one of the things I like to always look at as I'm walking through a home, here we are standing in the kitchen where there are a number of appliances located, and you can improve efficiency on electrical consumption by looking at age of equipment and efficiency of appliances. So we do have a side-by-side refrigerator here. Do you have any idea when this was purchased?
It was purchased in '93. We've had it since we bought the house.
So this has some decent standards associated with it because they did change, I believe somewhere in 1991, some of the standards associated with the refrigerator. So they did up the efficiencies at that point in time. Would you mind if I just open it for a sec?
No problem.
One of the things I like to look for, like this one kind of jumps out at me when I'm looking at it. I thought it could have been a little bit older than that. But one of the things, if you do own an older refrigerator, if the label of your system is down in this area here, it probably generally means that it predates 1991. This one has the label up in here with the model numbers on it, and you can very easily go on to many of the Energy Star sites and find the efficiency of these units. When I find a refrigerator that's post 1991, I'm not generally suggesting to change it out, but I will speak with the homeowner regarding next time they do change it, is to look at the most efficient one they can afford, and the Energy Star label would be right on that, so you know exactly what it's going to be using. Likewise with dishwashers, which we're standing, there's one right over here associated with the sink in that. I don't generally get into suggesting changing dishwashers out until they're broken, because people use them differently. Sometimes I'll go into home, they may use them once a week, twice a week, depending on the size of the family, could be every day. But ordinarily what I would suggest there as well is when you go to change that is to look for the Energy Star model. Other things that I would look at, with electricity is the cooking. But ordinarily, those aren't using, because they're either on or off. Typically in homes, things that are running are, your refrigerator. From an electrical standpoint, we didn't mention it when we were downstairs, or the dryer may be located up here. Electric dryers can tend to use a fair amount of kilowatts, so that's something you want to pay attention to. And they've just begun to change dryer standards, and I do believe now they have an Energy Star model that's out on the marketplace. Up until just recently, they did not. In here, we also have a fair amount of lighting, so this would also be a good space for LED lighting. Often in kitchens, when you walk into a kitchen, particularly with a lot of recessed lighting, you flip a switch. It's not just one bulb that goes on, it's several. And they can add up over time. There was one home I was in several years back that had 17 recessed cans in a space like this, and it may have been just a tad bigger, and they left the lights on a fair amount of time. When I calculated the math on them, that one room was costing them about $500 a year just for the lighting in that room, because they were running them so many hours per day.
So is a suggestion then, if you have a lot of recessed lights, maybe put them on different switches so they're concentrated in different areas?
It makes sense so that you don't have, like when you flip a switch, you don't have so many of them go on. Often, in new design, you flip a switch, it may be over the food preparation area and things like that. So that makes a lot of sense when you're designing a home. Any questions for anything in the kitchen space?
Mike, with the appliances, we also have Energy Star rebates that we offer through
Right.
Helps. I think we have refrigerators, we have dishwashers. As you mentioned previously with the dehumidifier, I
Right.
think we have a dehumidifier rebate, and you can check that out online too. But
Right.
there's a great opportunity there.
So I just wanted to touch on this room a bit. We're in a room that has a fair amount of glass in it, and typically coming into a room like this, I may hear that this room tends to be colder than other rooms. And the reason being is that we've got probably more glass in here than we do have insulated wall space. And that will lend itself, as I'd mentioned previously when speaking about windows, why this space would be colder. It's also got a higher ceiling, and it's also got skylights in it. So particularly on a cold winter night, what's going on in this room? We got air going up, and then I'm not sure how you utilize these doors in the winter months, but if they're not closed, you could probably feel some air being pulled through here. Again, hot and cold air moving to meet each other will create some internal drafting within your home, and you could be getting some of that here. We do have a ceiling fan, so if you are cranking the heat in this room, it may not be a bad idea to turn that on its very low winter setting so that you're allowing warm air to come back down and not sit up at the top of the ceiling there. And likewise over in this space here, we've also got a cathedral ceiling, and we've got a very high ceiling here, and we also have a fan, and that would also be something I'd suggest in a room like this when you have the heat running, have it on its winter setting. And its winter setting is sort of an updraft setting because it's pushing the warmer air up that drapes it back down the walls. A couple of things when it comes to ceiling fans while I'm thinking about it. Sometimes I go into homes and people leave them running 24/7 during the summer months. When you're not home, you're best to turn them off because there is really no cooling benefit being added when those things are running when nobody's home. It's really just circulating air. So if you want to circulate that air, it's best to turn them on once you come back in. Otherwise, you're just wasting electricity. And they can, depending on the fixture, it varies, but it could be 50 watts to 100 watts per hour of runtime. The other thing we haven't talked about yet is just sort of temperature setting in your home. And there's probably 3 or 4 thermostats in the home. I just want to touch on temperature in a home for a moment. One of the things that I'll speak with homeowners about is what they're keeping the temperature at in their home. And it varies from homeowner to homeowner. Some people can tolerate lower heat, others like it a bit warmer in the home. But one of the things that I'll often get asked is it advisable to set back my thermostat? And my answer is yes, as long as you're doing it for a certain period of time. I generally use like a 6-hour threshold. I think it makes sense to do that. So if you're leaving your house to go to work or kids are out to school during the day and the house is vacant, lowering that temperature down, 6 to 10 degrees, I think makes a lot of sense. And the rationale is this. Let's say you're maintaining 68 degrees in your home and you set it back to 60 degrees. When you're going from 68 to 60, you're not using any heat. And the real savings comes at the amount of time you spend at that lower temperature. When you're going from 60 to 68 and bringing it back up to temperature in your home, you are using heat. Essentially, an article I'm going to leave with you that describes it says that those two numbers, going from 68 to 60 and from 60 to 68, neutralize themselves so that you're really saving at that lower amount of temperature. So the ideal time, I think, to set back is either when the house is vacant and people are at work, and then again in the evening, lowering it down when folks are sleeping in bed. Now, there's a number of different things you can look at when it comes to thermostats. You can look at the programmables, which automatically do that. They've got the smart thermostats today that after a period of time, they get to recognize how you're utilizing your home, and they'll automatically do that for you. And there's a number of people that still do manually. I still do manual in my home. I had all the programmables for a period of time, and I've got 4 thermostats, and I took them out and just put the regular digitals in. Another thing to keep in mind with thermostats is the calibration of them. Over time, sometimes they can lose what the actual temperature is. I was actually in a home earlier this week in another part of the one of our other members, and this particular customer had some concerns about their electrical consumption. It was an all electrically heated home, and they were away for a period of time, and they didn't really see any drop in their bills. And after going through their home and looking at what they were doing, the only thing that I could figure out is based on what they were telling me is when they turned their electric heat on, as soon as they turned it on, like it was at the lowest level, they turned it up, it would click on. And that shouldn't have been clicking on at that point. Your thermostat shouldn't click on until you get to sort of the set point where you have what the temperature is in your home. So if your home is set at 70 and you turn your thermostat up to 68, your heat's not going to kick on. It shouldn't kick on until you go to 71 or 72. So the calibration of these things can be important as well, so you recognize that you're keeping the house at the temperature you think you're keeping it at.
If there's a calibration issue, do you have to replace it or can you repair?
Most of the time it's replace. It's probably not worth it because these types of thermostats are relatively inexpensive, so to have somebody come in and work on it is probably going to cost more than to repair.
With these old thermostats, not the digital ones, but these ones, they have mercury in them, so they have to be recycled at the health department, correct?
Yep.
Or at Home Depot usually takes them back. Things
and even with the, we talked about some of the bulbs. We didn't really focus too much on the CFLs, but the CFL bulbs also have a bit of mercury in them as well. So when it comes to disposing of them, you have to dispose of them appropriately, and there are stores that take them back in, or check with your local town, and they can tell you how to best to either recycle those bulbs or where to turn them in. So one of the things I generally like to talk about too is when I see a pool in the yard is about how long they're running the pool pump for and circulating water, and it varies from house to house, but they can use a fair amount of electricity depending on the size of the pump. Generally a 1 horsepower pump is somewhere in the 700 plus watt range. So if that's running 24/7 throughout the summer, it can have a high impact on your electric bill. So I'll generally speak with homeowners to look at maybe trying to drop that number down and still keep the clarity of the water that they need, but it's something to really pay attention to, and because it can help have a big impact on how much electricity you're using. Also, depending on where I'm working and what part of the state I'm in, and there is also there could be a little bit of it in Shrewsbury as well, is you can run into well pumps and also septic pumps, and those can also have an impact on how much electricity you're using. And often if those things fail, they'll fail on. One of the things I like to look at when I'm looking at electric bills is looking at spikes in bills. If I can see a couple of years of history, I can get a good feel for what's going on in the home. And typically in most homes, if you're really looking to try to get a baseline number, I think the best time of year is sort of that, and depending on how your bill runs, but a mid-September to mid-October reading is a really nice time to get a reading on baseline consumption in your home. Because if you think about it at that time, most pools are shut down right after Labor Day. You're not running air conditioning at that point. You're not running heat at that point. Your lights aren't on because you still got some daylight savings time going on. So it really gives you sort of what's your base number in your home. And what I mean by base number is your refrigerator, your lights, any of your TVs, those sorts of things that would be continuing to run in your home, and just your normal use of your home. So it's a really good time when sort of looking at your bill is to look at that time period. The spring can also be a good time, but as you think about the spring, sometimes you may have to kick the heat on in May and even early June, given some cool mornings. From an electrical standpoint, outdoor lighting can also be something, depending on how people use that. So if they're on a lot, they can also cause bills to run up. So I'll generally talk about maybe motion detectors and those types of lights. We're kind of here on a bit of an inclement day as well, but I like to generally do a walk around the exterior of the home. And just as I'm kind of looking around the back part of the home here, dry vents become some things I look at because lint can get caught in the dry vents. That becomes another avenue for allowing air in. As I'd mentioned in the basement, you have a felt gasket on your foundation and sill plate area, but that'll also be another area I'd be inspecting as walking around the house. I'd also be looking kind of around the outside at ventilation. We can see we've got soffit venting that runs along this line here. We've also got soffit venting that runs along the upper part of the roof as well. And then we've got, one of the things we've got going on sort of along this roof line too is we've got a drain pipe right there with water coming down. So that's also something I'd be looking at. That potentially could be an issue sometimes in the winter with icicles and snow accumulating in that area as well. So we've gone through the home, and what I'd like to do is just sort of review my findings with you,
Okay.
and let you know what else is available to you through the Shrewsbury Light Department. What I'd like to do before looking at the actual report itself is just kind of summarize my walkthrough of your home. So starting where we started in the boiler room, the boiler is the same age as your home. It's an atmospheric boiler, so it's definitely something you want to have on your radar screen to look at upgrading at some point down the road. If you haven't had it serviced, not a bad idea to have it serviced at some point, maybe before next heating season. As I mentioned, you have a bonnet hood on it, which allows for drafting, but there's also an electrical damper on there that closes, that allows that to keep heat within the boiler when the pilot is running. Your hot water tank is wrapped. What I suggested with that is at least minimally doing the first 6 feet of pipe insulation coming off of that tank. You could look at, the big thing to be concerned about with there is just make sure you stay 3 inches from that flue pipe. What I do see, and what homeowners may want to check out too, if they have insulation on their DHW tanks, just check the base of it. Sometimes I'll notice when they've got it down near the bonnet of the DHW tank, you can see a little bit of it melting because the heat can cause that foam insulation to melt. Walking around the rest of the basement, all the windows look fine. The walls are insulated. The one other thing I had touched on in the basement, or a couple of things I had touched on in the basement, was that flap in the exercise room. That's something that you probably have down purposefully, but in other homes, just pay attention to that because that's something that can restrict heat flowing in and around your home. There's also a dehumidifier down there, and when using those, just try to use the highest relative humidity setting that you can. And then looking at the garage, just the door leading out to the garage, that seemed to be sufficiently weather stripped. Coming up into the living space, looking at the windows and doors. Windows have been recently replaced. They're all double pane. Probably have a U value, as I mentioned previously, of about 0.30, which is a good quality Energy Star window. The doors are fairly well weather stripped as well. If you do feel any leakage, as I'd mentioned, there's another piece of weather stripping you could add to that door. Also looking at that front vestibule area coming in, you do have a high ceiling there, so that can lead to some internal air movement within your home just because of temperature differentials within your home. Going up into the second floor, windows are fine, walls are insulated. The big area that I probably would look at concentrating on, I think you could see some economies there, would be adding a cover over the pull-down stairwell, doing some air sealing up in the attic space, as well as leveling off the insulation up there. With that being said, this is the book that I mentioned to you that I'm going to leave with you. We leave with just every homeowner. I like it because it's all broken out by chapter. It covers just about everything from A to Z. A couple of chapters I always like to highlight is chapter 2. It has a nice discussion on insulation, air sealing, which is stopping drafts within your home, and also has a nice section on windows within there. Chapter 4 has a good read-through on heating systems. It gets into, one of the big things it gets into is just sort of how to choose a heating contractor, some of the things to be aware of when choosing a heating contractor. Chapter 6 gets into cooling. 6 gets into hot water. Hot water has a nice discussion on it too because it talks about operational efficiency of units. And then from 7 on kind of deals with all of your household appliances. So it is a really nice guide when it comes to household energy efficiency, something you can leave on the bookshelf.
Yeah, no, this is great.
I always like to leave this booklet as well. It's a consumer guide to air sealing. And I always point this page out here because I think it's indicative of things that I highlight in homes. And it shows essentially a plumbing stack going into an attic space and a junction box going into an attic space. And those are areas that can get caulked and air sealed around. And likewise, not so much in this particular basement because it's a finished basement and a heated basement, but also in basement areas. Those are the same sorts of things we're looking at. We're looking to stop those areas where there are unconditioned spaces, where air can move into conditioned spaces. And that's a nice guide for looking at that. I've also got this booklet here. Picks on some of the same stuff that's in the bigger book, but it's just a nice summary read. And again, it's all broken out by section, so you can take a quick look through that. I've got a couple of other handouts I always like to present in just about every home I go into. This was actually an article I clipped off of ACEEE's website. These are the folks that put this big book out. And it just got some interesting blurbs on what they call myth-busting facts surrounding energy efficiency. This next article here talks to how heat transfers, conduction, convection, and radiation. I've actually underlined this section on convection because it talks about what I mentioned about why we feel cold around glass and what goes on with that.
Yep.
And then the last one is an article I clipped out of a newspaper several years ago, and it kind of summarizes what I had mentioned relative to thermostat settings and the benefits of turning your temperature down. Now, as I mentioned, there are a couple of things that you probably could consider within your home. and I just wanted to review the Shrewsbury Electric Light Department's incentives. So in your particular case here, you could look at the blower door and air sealing incentive. I think in your attic space, you've got some opportunities for that where they could do some sealing. And at the same time, they could probably go up there and level off the insulation. You could potentially even add some additional insulation up there because you're probably somewhere in that 9, 10, 11, 12 inches. So you could probably top that off with at least another 4 or 5 inches up there. Bring that up to closer to R15. And again, they'd have an insulation rebate associated with that, which is 50% up to $400.
And the insulation contractor should be able to tell you, like, what would be the ideal, wouldn't he?
Yeah, they're going to, I mean, there's a whole host of good ones that are in the area. Generally, we don't have a sanctioned list on the Muni Helps program, but in going into so many homes, I call this sort of my greater Worcester area that I work in because there's a number of towns we do around this area. And I have a listing of about 8 to 10 contractors that people have used that they've all liked. And what I generally say is, here's a list of contractors that we don't have any affiliation with, but people have used them. I've seen their work. People have been happy with them. So, and I always suggest getting at least 2, if not 3 quotes, so you can be sure you're getting the appropriate price. As Jackie had mentioned earlier, when we were talking about appliances, this is the listing of the appliances rebates that are available to you from the Shrewsbury Light Department. I've also got the Cool Homes rebate form as well. We're going to speak specifically about air conditioning. Let me just touch on that for a moment. You do have air conditioning here. SEER rating is important, but generally in New England, it varies on how people use their air conditioning. So even if we're using it 2 months, unless the system's really old, changing those out, to get efficiency, there'll be some savings for you, but it may not be significant enough to say that there's a return on investment for you there. But I always suggest when you get to changing out your air conditioning unit, you want to get the highest SEER rating, seasonal energy efficiency ratio, that you can when purchasing that. And then also Selco has loans that you can borrow up to $3,500 for them, and then this is the sheet that describes their loan process. And then I've got my business card here, should you have any questions on anything in the future. And then what I ordinarily do is I have this report that I've collected data as I've walked through your home. And I email this report back to you, but we have a cover letter on there. And then kind of based on the size of your home and how the efficiency, how the energy would be distributed among heating and cooling, it's got a pie chart. Then it breaks out a sort of a grid as to the recommended measures. So in here we have LED light bulbs, pipe insulation. I did put in for the replacement gas boiler, adding additional insulation into the attic, the air sealing opportunity, and then the pull down stairwell.
Okay, this is great, just to let everybody know that it does give you like an estimate cost. So so when you walk out of here, you kind of have an idea of what these things are going to cost you before you decide, what you want to do and when you want to. You can plan for that.
And does it also include what the estimated savings
Yes.
would be for each item, so that you could say, oh, well, if this is going to cost me X dollars and it's going to save me Y, I can estimate it'll take me this many years to pay it
It's
back.
good,
That's right, yep.
It's right
So
on
that's
the-
great.
And it tells you what the payback period is too. That's fantastic.
And then for each one of the measures that's recommended here, there's a little blurb that goes into a little additional detail on each one of those measures.
And as Mike mentioned, we do have a loan program for some of the measures that he might recommend. So you can get up to $3,500 at 0 interest for 5 years for replacement windows and doors, added insulation. I think air sealing, added insulation is kind of the same.
Yep.
And we also offer a $10,000 loan if you're going to replace an old electric heating system with an energy efficient gas or oil, and solar. So you may get some questions on solar. People who are interested in solar, Mike, one of the requirements for the loan is that you get an energy audit. And when you call to schedule your energy audit, if you indicate that you're interested in solar, Mike can actually do a solar evaluation at your property to let you know what the efficiency of an installation would be there.
But generally what we're looking at is sort of, the direction of south, so we can see what that looks like, and, what the roof slope looks like, and then what the tree line may be around that. If there's no, like this home here would probably be a perfect fit for adding solar, because I don't see any blockage of anything around this home. And often now you can actually call up a solar company. They pull you right up on Google Earth, and they can kind of give you an idea right then and there what at least a baseline estimate of what you're looking to do. And there's been a lot of solar installations in town. I know just within the last week or two we've done a couple of inspections on systems that were recently completed.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I always leave a couple light bulbs. As I indicated, I'd be happy to install them. If you don't want them installed, I just leave them. But I always ask the homeowner if they'd like me to put them in anywhere. And then any questions for me before I go?
I don't think so. I think that this was like great. It was very educational. I learned a lot about where I'm losing heat, obviously. But it's also, I love this package that you put together because it really just outlines everything that you really need to know. A couple of things, the books and everything, we have to remind everybody that this is free. Like,
Yep.
he doesn't
It's
charge
covered
to
by
come out here.
Selco.
And you get all this stuff for free, so which is great. A lot of great advice. And then if I wanted to move forward with any of this, would I have to present this information, or would I just have to say I had the energy audit?
So for the loan application, it gives you instructions with what you need to include. You do need to include a copy of the audit that he's done, showing that the measure you're asking for a loan on is a recommended measure.
Okay.
You have to apply with us. We check to see what your history is with us as far as prompt payment and not missing any payments. We got to make sure you're a customer in good standing. Once the loan's approved, you would go ahead and get the measures installed, and you'd submit back to Mike to have him come in and inspect, make sure it's done correctly.
Okay.
And then you'd finish up the application process with us, and we'd disperse a check.
And I think it's important to note too that the payments just come out, just get added to your.
As a line item on your electric bill, absolutely,
So
every
that's
month.
how-
So
yeah, that's how that would get paid off. And then these light bulbs, you said they're available. Where else can we get these light bulbs?
Most of the hardware stores will carry them. The big box stores in town will have them. The local hardware stores will have them as well. And you can find them a lot of these under $5 a bulb now, and some for even less than that.
I know Papa's Hardware had a really great deal on them last year. I don't know if they still have it going on, but they had them at a really great price for quite a while.
And you were mentioning that you do have these at the farmers market. And
Yeah, in the summertime when we do the summer farmers market, we're one of the sponsors, so we usually go a few times. Probably one of those times we'll have these bulbs, and we'll offer them at a discounted price. And actually, all of the money that we collect when we sell them is actually a donation to Share the Warmth, which is also a program that we have to help those who can't
That's
afford
great,
electricity pay some of their
Yeah.
bills in the winter months.
and also at the Spirit of Shrewsbury.
At the Spirit of Shrewsbury, we generally have those as well, yep.
Okay, good stuff.
So generally, in closing, I always ask if there are any questions that I haven't addressed. If not, what I always suggest is that after you've looked at this, if you should have questions, whether it's tonight, 6 months, or a year from now, feel free to reach out. I'm not trying to sell you anything other than good, sound advice. If I don't have the answer, I've been in the industry since 1981. I can usually pick up the phone and send an email out and find out something and get you at least the information back. And I've also got a whole host of information that I've just cataloged over the years that if somebody's looking to do their own work, I can send them information on how to as well.
Okay, great.
Great.
Well, thanks so much.
You're very welcome.